So Donald Trump Jr. has recently come out and explained why feminism in general Western society and in the workplace is a detriment. And I myself worked in the finance industry for over 10 years, including Goldman Sachs, explain to you in this video why he's correct and what we can do about it. Let's go through Donald Trump Jr. and his take on feminism. Now, feminism is having a very negative impact in the work environment and the social dynamics of the West. It's really gone too far. But typically, when people like me or you mention it, you get labeled misogynist or patriarchal or whatever dumb term they come up with now. Even though it's gone so far, it's so obvious, it's so in your face, you're still considered a bad person for pointing it out. But interestingly enough, here he talks about this, and what I like about this platform here, which is DJ Academics interviewing Donald Trump Jr., is DJ Academics, he's coming from an African-American background, and this system, through its psyops, it tries to push all people of color, including myself, into this left-wing narrative, which is like this oppression narrative, or that masculinity is bad, or that men are bad in general, or that patriarchy doesn't work when it does work. And also they want to push you into this kind of narrative of, okay, cool, so if you're a person of color, you've got to support feminism. You've got to support the rainbow community. You've got to support mass migration. You've got to support all the left-wing talking points. Otherwise, you know, to quote Donald Trump, to quote Joe Biden, if you don't vote for Joe Biden, if you don't vote for the Democrats, you're not actually black, right? So I don't even know how far these left-wing people are taking these narratives that they think they can dictate to you and tell you what to think. And DJ Academics is someone who can think for himself, even though he plays a bit of a funny, goofy character on his YouTube channel and his live streaming when he talks about hip-hop and things like that. He's clearly smarter than the kind of persona he puts on, like the satire he's putting on. And he describes himself as a satirist, right? So he's fully aware that he's playing a bit of a character. And he clearly aligns quite closely to what is generally right-wing views, right, around gender, around say, you know, a country maintaining its borders, having a strong man in a position of power, like Donald Trump, for example. And we're going to listen to a bit of context of them both discussing this point. So let's see what they say.
My man Sneeko, you ever heard of Sneeko?
Yeah.
Sneeko's.
Now, firstly, I just want to point out quickly, he's aware of Sneeko. Donald Trump Jr. is aware of Sneeko. Now, Sneeko, you know, he got banned from YouTube for some of his views, some of his commentary. And he's basically on Rumble right now, which is an alternative to YouTube. He discusses some of the issues I mentioned, along with many other content creators before. What he does quite effectively, Donald Trump Jr. here, is he shows he is aware of, like, there is an entire alternative perspective, alternative media. You want to call it conspiracy theorist media, right-wing media, whatever you want to call it, truther media, the Great Awakening, however they want to label it. He is aware of these kind of niche spaces that have kind of been pushed off mainstream platforms. So that's a good thing to hear.
What do you think about, like, you've heard of the manosphere, right? What do you think about, like, you know, there's a lot of, we talked yesterday, you know, when we were at Mar-a-Lago about, like, really the pendulum swing, and there's always an answer to every extreme thing that happened. And we've seen, like, red pill stuff and other things kind of pop up as almost kind of like an answer to some of the things that you were seeing, which was seemingly almost like an emasculate, like you're seeing men being emasculated in front of the world, right?
So just before we dive into Donald Trump Jr.'s answer, let's just take a moment to think this through, right? So DJ Academics, what is he saying? He's talking about the emasculation agenda, right? Now, I've worked at many top banks, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, HSBC, and without referring to them specifically, the social dynamics are completely warped. It's completely, you have a lot of weak, soy boy, bug men, last men, liberal type of men, right, who would just be simping and pandering to the female colleagues. Even if women make mistakes at work, it gets overlooked and the men will pick up the slack. The special treatment that they get, and typically I remember working on the trading floor of one major bank, and there were a lot of beta orbiters, if we want to use that phrase, or simps, where you'd have a tech team that I was working next to, even though I didn't work in the tech team itself. And it would be a woman who wouldn't do much work. She'd just chill throughout the day. She'd just be chit-chatting. And all the men, the other 5 or 8 men, would basically pick up the slack and help her and do her work and always be around her desk and training her. It's a bit like if you have one girl in a gym, you'll have like 20 guys trying to flirt with her. It's this weird dynamic you see time and time again. And if people want to do whatever they want to do in their personal life, I don't really care, right? I was working at a major American investment bank at the time. I really couldn't care less. I just wanted to progress in my career. But but what really does get annoying, is when that type of simp mentality, feminism, whatever you want to call it, starts impacting your ability to succeed. Like, you're at work, and if a woman makes a mistake, it's not made a big deal of. But if you make a mistake, then you're a bad person, or you're going to get written up on your performance review. So many times women will make mistakes, sometimes it's maybe a valid mistake that, anyone could make, not blaming them, not saying they make all the mistakes. But what ends up happening then is that they will effectively get that overlooked. It won't get written up in their report. A man will pick up the mistake and correct it. That's the general take, right? This kind of savior complex that you have a lot of men doing when it comes to women. And then it's like, then we have an unfair playing field, right? If you're going to be like, okay, well, if a woman makes a mistake, we're just going to act like it wasn't a mistake and overlook it. And then you have this constant non-stop environment in the office where women will make little digs or negative comments about men, whether it's their boyfriends, their husbands, male co-workers, these little cheap shots, little S-tests, S-H-I-T tests, if you want to call it that, where it's just like, oh, you have to endure it. You have to sit through women gossiping, sit through them chit-chatting and whinging about the work, or their husbands, or their boyfriends, or that they're not being promoted enough, or they're not being hired enough in the hiring process. They're not receiving favorable treatment here. They deserve better treatment. They deserve this. They deserve that. And you're just there at work trying to do your job and get paid. And it's like, okay, I have to listen to this, and not only do that, if I ignore their whinging, then I'm a bad person as a man. I have to listen to their constant venting. It's part of the job. I have to pick up the slack for their tasks. And then you got to put up with the kind of cheap shot insults against men, which is just a very common thing. Even in an environment you would consider a quote-unquote male space, which definitely isn't on the trading floor of a major investment bank, right? In the workplace environment, you're meant to believe, particularly in finance, it's some kind of Wolf of Wall Street, Mad Men environment, Gordon Gekko, the Wall Street movies you might have seen, Margin Call. It's really not like that, You have small elements of that, but it's kind of like they've emasculated the workplace environment and feminized it so much. You can't really be a man in a workplace environment. You're always on the back foot, and it's just become ridiculous. And that's why I think a lot of men, they're opting for dropping out of society, whether it's, working from home, having a remote job, hybrid work so they can be away from this society, traveling abroad to date women, maybe just staying at home and playing video games. And I'm not really like a video games guy, but I understand why you might have guys who just spend a lot of their free time on internet forums and like YouTube and things like that. Because, this emasculation agenda, I ignored it for many years, in a sense that I was aware of it at college, at university, and at workplace in the start of my career. I just work hard to succeed, in a male's mind, in a man's mind, in an Asian culture, that even though I didn't grow up in I grew up in a diverse part of London. In the way a man's mind works, in the way Asian culture typically works, it's very hierarchical, and it's very meritocracy and competency based, in the sense that, there's a hierarchy, you work hard, you move up to the next level, you succeed. And that's what you're sold in the corporate environment. That's the narrative. If you work hard, you have performance reviews at the end of the year, you get a bonus that correlates with your hard work, you get promoted based on your hard work. If you put more in, you get more out. But that's really the complete opposite of how it works, right? If you suck up to the right people, if you're a woman, if you're part of some kind of chosen minority group, if you parrot the right woke, liberal, leftist, feminist agendas, that's what will help you succeed. And that's why you see a lot of men become demoralized, because they see, okay, cool, you're basically mocking men. You're expecting us to put the same effort as other groups who are getting preferential treatment. It's just not going to work long term. You're just going to see men dropping out. So let's continue with the video.
100%. 100%. I mean, the whole thing's ridiculous. We're letting men play women's sports now. Like, well, where are the women? Like, by the way, speaking of men, like, this is going on a daily basis, and it's like it only goes one way. You have, men aren't allowed to be masculine, and you can't have much, and you can't say, it's insane. I mean, there is a clear attack on men, on masculinity.
See, he understands the issue here. Now, he gives the example of sports, right? That obviously, men are physically stronger than women. But based on the culture that we have in the West, you can't even say that men are physically stronger than women. We can't talk about the mental differences that, men have bigger brains than women, because that would be considered completely misogynist. But you can look at the science behind that. You can look at the various physical and mental differences between women. Can't address those things. Can't talk about how men are calmer in more stressful situations. Men are less emotional if you're dealing with a very stressful situation at work due to radical change. Maybe you're trading on the day of the Brexit vote, you're trading on the day of the US election, you're trading through various difficult volatile financial markets during the Ukraine war, things like that. The man's mind, which is cool, calm, and collected, typically can do well in those environments under stress. That's why men go to war, not just because they're physically capable, because they're also mentally capable. And in the example that he's giving is around sports, because you're not allowed to talk about men being smarter than women. You're not allowed to talk about men being maybe more competent in those mental faculties in the office environment. We're meant to talk about, we can only say that, maybe men shouldn't be competing in women's sports based on the transformer trans agenda type of thing, right? That's the only time you can really address it, right? So he's taking a political correct approach, as you'd probably expect from the son of a politician now, right? So firstly, yeah, exactly. And I support actually, controversially enough maybe, I support trans whatever people being in women's sport, because then you get to see the difference between men and women. If you have a trans person versus a woman in a UFC MMA fight, if you have a trans person versus a woman in a football match, in a rugby match, in anything that involves strength and things, you see the difference. I want to see Ronda Rousey, who's made certain negative comments about men and recently falsely accused a guy called Drew Gulak for accidentally touching her. It's kind of weird. Let me go on a side note here. So Ronda Rousey was in the WWE, the wrestling company, and she recently wrote an autobiography which she was promoting, and then she said that there was one guy there who did something inappropriate. And what the inappropriate thing was, he went to shake her hand, and when he went to shake her hand, his hand accidentally hit her trousers drawstring. When you have sweatpants, you have a little string around the waist, and he accidentally tapped that, and then he shook her hand. And he said, I apologize for that. He apologized at the time. She's mentioning this years later to make WWE look like some kind of toxic male environment. And this is a typical thing you have in the office too, right? Any point, a woman can accuse you now, accuse you 5 years from now, accuse you of something that happened at a Christmas work drinks, accuse you of something you said or did, or maybe if you're in a space where other people aren't there, she could accuse you of anything. The whole system, the whole corporation and government and media will go and back her and destroy you. And this guy actually has been suspended from work because he's been falsely accused from a woman for doing what? Accidentally trying to shake her hand and then touching the drawstring on her trousers. The ridiculousness you have to deal with in the work environment, and like I say, it's just not sustainable. Now, I think there should be more of transgender people within women's sports to show that clear difference. I salute all the men who want to put on a wig and go and compete in women's sports. Go ahead. I mean, I'm not stopping anyone. Let's let the degeneracy, let's let the craziness play out the way it's got to play out. I don't really care. And I want to see this woman deal with the circumstances of getting all this special treatment, and then still you can't compete with a man. What is that actually saying? I mean, does gender roles make sense then? Probably not, because we have to pretend that gender roles are bad things, right? And the other thing here to point out is that, when we talk about these narratives, strong, empowered, brave, courageous, hashtag girl power, hashtag girl boss, me too, believe woman, the future is female, women are better than men, anything a man does, a woman can do better, all these type of narratives that you are bombarded with in the corporate environment is convenient enough. It's only, these type of strong, empowered career woman, independent woman, whatever. it's only when they're getting all this special treatment, when it comes to hiring and promotion practices, when middle-aged men in management are sucking up to these young women in their early 20s, not saying anything inappropriate is going on there, but sometimes they get these fast-tracked careers promoted through all the levels, because the entire corporate environment is built around pandering to them, built around their social environment and their views and equality and emotions and things like that, and all these woman empowerment networks. It's basically, you have essentially like a gang, like a special, like a mafia or a mob, that kind of gets special treatment, and you're on the outside of that unless you're a man who's sucking up to that. So it's completely a bizarre environment. And firstly, you don't get a lot of that positive messaging at work as a man. It's all going towards women. Then you got this, being in an office as a woman in a position of power, delegating the real work to other people, typically men who are in junior roles, because there's hiring and promotion biases against men. And then also typically, kind of playing office politics, social politics at work, kind of schmoozing and sucking up to the right people, responding to a few emails. This is considered strong and empowering, right? You're not really going to see women all the time, really, in the work environment, doing the graft, doing the grit, doing the difficult tasks that exist within the office environment, and they definitely won't be doing the manual labor that keeps this collapsing Western civilization from completely caving in. You're not going to see them doing construction, doing the mining, doing the engineering, doing the hard labor works, oil drilling, things like that. So it's convenient just to trash men when women seem to be under some kind of delusion that with more men dropping out, you're just not going to have a sustainable Western civilization. Get used to what you currently see, which is declining living standards.
And I think that's across all cultures. I mean, but you see plenty of that in the African American community as well. And like it's so flagrant at this point. So like, I don't know, I'm sort of unapologetically masculine, and like I think that's fine. And I think it's probably how humankind has survived over years. I mean, and that's fine. That's not to take away from women. That's not that, but there's different, they are different. We are different, and that's okay. That's neither here nor, that doesn't mean one's better than another. You need both. But I've literally started businesses sort of about that, even in the outdoor space. Some of the stuff I do, and where even there, and hunting and fishing, it's like, oh well, we got to do this, and we got to talk about that. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, what's going on here? Like. So, I just sort of, I don't think it's even old school, but I do think that people are sort of getting it now. This whole, like, the attack on male culture and, the arbitrary, like, every man needs to be feminine, every woman needs to be masculine. It's like...
Well, they almost made it egregious to be like, hey, listen, well men, they're part of rape culture, or there's toxic masculinity. Yeah.
So just before we continue with this, firstly, there are no male spaces. The office is not a male space. If you're maybe outside the office environment, maybe you're at college or university and you're watching this and you're kind of brainwashed with the liberal stuff, the office is not an environment where men feel safe or comfortable, because at any moment you could look at the woman a wrong way and then that impacts your career. I noticed a man who was kind of friendly with a receptionist during one of my internship. He was kicked off the internship because he said something inappropriate. I don't know what he said, but it's like you can't even be friendly because that could be misinterpreted as flirting. I remember two colleagues during that same internship, without naming the company, essentially what had happened was that you had this male and female who'd been working together for many years, and the male at some point smiled at her. She thought the smile was inappropriate, and on an open office workplace, open plan office, which means there's no private rooms, it's just completely open space, she was like shouting at him for smiling at her inappropriately. This is the type of weird scenario that you have as a man. It's like anything could be used against you, even now or decades in the future. Like we see men get accused, many decades later, like Brett Kavanaugh, Bill Crosby, things like that. Even though they're controversial figures now, R. Kelly, things like that. Anyone can frame something in the past as being a bad thing, even simple things men can do. I've been in a workplace where a woman has got promoted, and then it's kind of, a woman's been promoted, and then she would hug each member of the team. And I hugged the woman the way, because we were all expected to, even though I prefer not to make physical contact with co-workers in general. But I'm always like, someone could always reframe that as an inappropriate hug decades later. That's the society you live in. So it is what it is.
Like being a man just became a crime.
Yeah, well,
right?
it's toxic masculinity until until shit happens and you need some toxic
need
masculine
some
guys to go take care of the problem, right? Like,
so a couple points here. He mentioned a bit earlier around hunting and fishing. So like I say, there are no male spaces, right? In the corporate environment, the gym has been turned into a 3 or 4 house. No, you can interpret however you want. That's what it's turned into. It's turned into like some kind of bizarre, you go to the gym environment, and that's why I go to the gym at times when it's not busy. It's like you're going in like, what is going on here? There's selfie cameras everywhere. There's a woman dressed inappropriately. And there's no basic level of like social rules, of social dignity, of like, in other countries, like I think Singapore and places like that, there's some basic official rules of how people should conduct themselves in public spaces, like public dignity rules. You don't really have that in the West that need to be enforced. So you don't have the gym environment used to be a male environment. That's not a male environment. Hunting and fishing, he's giving those examples of like activities he runs where apparently they're being told they have to give lectures around feminism, things like that, and gender equality. It's just become too ridiculous. Now, and then, like I say, in the workplace environment, you're under a lot of accusation. Now, DJ Academics mentioned a few moments ago around grape culture. And, I remember working at a major investment bank, just doing my job. And there's so many, like I say, activities for women, not for men. And one of these activities is going to some of these networking things around women and domestic situations and things like that. And there was a model there told about the Duluth model, which is like, not only that if a man physically does something to a woman, that's a bad thing, which, okay, that's one thing. But the other thing is like almost anything a man does to a woman can be considered a bad thing, right? Like coercive control. Like if a man tells a woman that's inappropriate, that's wrong, then he could be considered patriarchal or a bad person. And these are things they're told about through these indoctrination meetings where, that if that impacts their personal life, I couldn't care less. But if we're in a work environment and a woman can now frame anything as a man being bad or doing something wrong to her, then you're basically, guilty before innocent in a workplace environment.
And that's the problem, right? It's always like that. So, I have a buddy, Christian Craighead. He's a British guy. He was British SAS. That's like their SEAL teams, right?
Yeah.
And there was a hostage thing. I think it was Boko Haram in Nairobi, Kenya. They took over a school, young school kids and whatever. And this guy was working in the area, drove by, literally threw on a mask, took an AK, and like just went in and killed all the bad guys. Saved like all these school children. And like the British government, like, this is an example of toxic. I'm like,
so we'll just end it here, right? So he's talking about toxic masculinity in the context of conflict, right? So conflict between, in a wartime military scenario, right? Without going too much into detail of what he's specifically saying here. The issue here is that, in the office environment, it's the same. Men are bad, men are toxic, men are this, men are that, until it's time to get the work done. Then dump buckets load of work on the man to do, on the men to do, the junior men to do, and the woman get the credit because they're in a more senior position, right? I remember working at another investment bank where we had a woman I was working with 2 women who were constantly off sick, right? They were off sick for one reason or the other. And it's basically a 3-person team. And the 2 people I'm meant to be working with were just constantly out of the office, right? Eventually, they left the company because they didn't like the female manager they were working for because there was these, petty dynamics, to leave it at that, between these female colleagues. So people were being falsely off sick. They were always whinging about the work. They always had a reason not to do the work. And I was picking up the slack for 2 employees who weren't working as they should have been, right? Now, what can we learn from this is that I wasn't getting paid anything extra. I was picking up the slack for them. And what they do in the workplace environment is they just expect you to put up with this. And then when you are doing the work, I remember some days I'll be super busy in like December, doing this work to finish work in terms of certain deadlines, training hundreds of traders and salespeople on things like that, on like different risk management issues. And on top of that, I had to listen to these female co-workers whinging about some type of advert on television where it was the Peloton advert where a man had bought a bike for his wife. And they said, oh, this is misogynistic. How can he tell his wife to lose weight? He didn't actually do that. He just bought a bike for his wife because I enjoyed exercise, right? But it's like, it's just too much. And that's what's kind of put me off a lot of the workplace environments. I highly encourage remote work if you are a man to be outside of that environment. I highly encourage you, if you're climbing the corporate ladder as a man, to protect yourself at all times. Don't get caught up in these type of toxic scenarios when you can be accused of anything. Be careful when you do have one-on-one meetings with a woman, because you don't know if she accuses you of something else. Hopefully that meeting room has a CCTV camera so you can't be accused of at least physically doing anything. Even though then again, even if you don't do anything, you could be accused of verbal abuse or something like that, right? So it's just a very crazy environment. There's so many different examples of this. Regardless of what your particular interests are and your hobbies are, you know at least a couple cases of men being cancelled like this, right? And DJ Academics here has dealt with those false accusations before, and thankfully he has cameras in his own home, so you could share that with the police to show he didn't do anything wrong. And then in the case of Donald Trump Jr., I don't know if he's been accused of things, but I think he's on his second or third marriage, right? So there's a completely dysfunctional dynamic here that you're meant to endure, not only socially, which I kind of avoid. I'm not the most social person, but when you're at work and it's like, oh, meritocracy, throw that out the window for the sake of feminism. Competency, throw that out the window for the sake of feminism. Working hard to succeed, throw that out the window for feminism. Throw everything out the window, including your entire Western civilization, to benefit liberalism, feminism, weak liberal simp men, and entitled delusional feminists that get propped up in positions of power. And then not only do they give work to you and treat you unfairly as a man, but then they talk down to you and tell you what you should believe. And that's why, as a side note, there are many different groups that maybe have different religious beliefs from me, different racial beliefs from me, and things like that. But they're taking a stand, you know, even if we have differences on that, people who are taking a stand and saying, oh, I've had enough, I'm not really going to be talked down to. You go to work to work. I don't go to work to deal with woke, liberal, feminist ideology be dictated to me. I'm bad because either I'm a man or I'm bad because I'm not agreeing with your ridiculous liberal left-wing propaganda. Like, that's not part of work. I go to work in the finance industry. I'm working in finance. If it's finance related, we can do that. But if you're just going to expect me to constantly pick up the slack for women not doing their job, or things like that, or put up with unfair hiring and promotion practices, I'm not really going to put up with that. So that's what it is, and that's why, as part of my training program as a career coach, I encourage you to kind of take control of your life, build a career that you actually enjoy, take control of your time so you have time freedom. Focus on being rich forever by savings and investments, and then live a life you love, like on your basis, on your definition of that, right? Don't think you have to go to a job and just get beaten over the head, not only with unfair work practices based on the fact you're a man, but also unfair practices in terms of sitting through hours of propaganda every year, So myself, DJ Academics, who is a great online content creator, has built many successful YouTube channels, made millions of dollars through Spotify deals, through deals with Rumble, which is a video streaming platform, $1 million of money through YouTube ad revenue. He's a successful man, even though you might look at him and think, oh, this just looks like a DJ or a normal person, right? His house is worth $2 million. He's been accused of things. Women have tried to destroy him with false allegations. And this is the reality. It's kind of a weird world to live in the West. And from a workplace perspective, no one should be surprised that men are just not as engaged as they used to be at the workplace. So there you have it, right? Donald Trump, myself, ex-Goldman Sachs Investment Banking employee, we agree with that. It's kind of gone too far with this feminist approach, and how we really need to rethink how we're approaching things in Western society if we want to have a sustainable, functioning system. Thanks for listening. If you look into the description, you'll see there are 2 links. There's a link to have a meeting with me if you're interested in discussing your career. There's also a link to a free ebook, and there are 2 recommended videos on your screen right now. Leave a comment below if you have any interesting commentary to add to this, maybe your experiences on this topic, and I'll see you in the next video.